Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. Time for another show. Time for another Supreme Court. Time for another system of laws. What can I tell you? You're waking up in a different place. Although, many of you, I guess, have been here before. But it's been a while, let's say. Essentially, of course, speaking of what the Supreme Court handed us yesterday in the 10 o'clock hour of our show, I think it was clear before we were out of here exactly what we would be looking at today. And now there's some analysis to lean on, some other organized thoughts that we can share with you today. But that essentially, when I said some of you have been here before, some of you would have been here, of course, during the Watergate era, which you thought was over. And by the way, which the succeeding president, Gerald Ford, told you also by virtue of the fact that he had pardoned President Nixon, which can cut either way in this one. But after the pardon, of course, he told us that the long national nightmare was over. But in fact, as it turns out, the long national nightmare is merely longer than we thought. And it may be over, or it may be that the nation is over at long last after this nightmare, or something like that. I hate to be too hyperbolic about it, but there's not much else in the way of analysis that's available. Although I did see that the Washington Post is circulating a story rounding up all of the various decisions over the past several days, with under the headline of the Supreme Court didn't go as far as it could have in all of this. I'm not certain where else they think they may have gone. And of course, in the face of yesterday's decision, while that's still being digested, it's really rather ridiculous to have gone with that headline. But perhaps I can dig that one up. I mean, it's been passed around on social media so frequently, I'm surprised that I can't immediately bring it to the front of the screen just with a quick scroll. But anyway, we'll look around and add various voices to the roundup. But yeah, if you made it through Watergate and you watched post-Watergate, Richard Nixon, of course, famously telling David Frost that his interpretation of the whole thing was always that if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. And Jamel Bowie quotes from him at some greater length. That's the usual clip that we hear. But there's a little bit more to it, which, I don't know if I would say clarifies the situation at all. It just expands on the same idea that somehow if the president does it, it's not illegal. Of course, the president is supposed to be doing it in furtherance of national security. And some of what Donald Trump has done, most of what Donald Trump has done, has actually been to the detriment of national security, at least arguably. But the point the Supreme Court was trying to make yesterday was that the president wins that argument if he says, this is something that I did for national security reasons. One, you merely have to accept that and his interpretation of it. And two, that you're not allowed to inquire after his motivations at all anyway, so you're stuck with it. So that a Donald Trump type person could say that for whatever reason, in his view, it was in furtherance of national security to, whatever, pay off a porn star, for instance, because he's going to be making that excuse now too. Telling people that E. Jean Carroll isn't his type. That was his first line of defense, in fact, in her suit, was that he ought to have been immune from that, and that even his saying that he thought she was too unattractive for him to have raped her. Yes. That, too, was an official act. Anything's official. And, of course, I mean, they've been not exactly explicit, but it's certainly many of the other commentators will set up the argument that that the Supreme Court handed themselves a rule that was so ambiguous that it would be a very simple thing to say, well, when a Democrat does it, that's a non-official act and therefore subject to prosecution. When a Republican does it, well, golly, we have no right to inquire after why he did it anyway. But it's so obvious to us that it's in furtherance of national security. Even when the act is stealing national security secrets and showing them to unauthorized people or possibly offering them for sale. I don't know. I can't. It's a big mystery. And when the president does it, that means it's not illegal. It's quite amazing. It's a little disconcerting, let's say, for those people who, I will now say, think that they went to and graduated from law school or practiced law as a licensed attorney for the past 50 plus years at any point. But hey, it's not my job to prop them up. They need to buck up and find a new hobby, I guess. I'm not certain what to tell them, actually. But it's quite disconcerting, of course, to find out that the person with the rather stupid child's view of the presidency, who was so obviously dumb and wrong up until yesterday, actually turns out to be right. And there's no better concept to illustrate the idea of how it looks and feels to be pre-wrong on this or any other subject in the law. I mean, that's exactly what happened here. You were brought up with the understanding that no one was above the law, and you were wrong. You didn't know it. But further, it is the assertion of the Republican right that it was true all along. You were wrong to have guffawed at Nixon's assertion of power, that it was illegal. It's not illegal if the president does it. You were wrong to think that the president wasn't above the law, and that this wise Supreme Court was really just sort of, stroking its chin and nodding and smiling knowingly at all the rest of us who went on and on saying, yeah, even the president, no one's above the law. And they said it at all their confirmation hearings. People are compiling all the video of them saying it. But really they were saying, the truth is the president is above the law. You people, you don't have the galaxy brains to understand this. It's like that weird character from the Men in Black movies, the fifth dimensional alien who sees all possibilities at all times, right? We're all happily marching along thinking we have a certain order to things, but as it turns out, in reality, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, the whole bit, they were all getting together saying, secretly, we're recreating a president with no accountability to anybody. A super powerful king-like figure. Yes, we had a revolution to throw that off, but all we really meant was that we wanted to accrue that power to one of ourselves and never be held in check by any one of our neighbors or any of them collectively. Now, there's no historical record for that, but again, if you're the fifth dimensional sort of being, you can see that that was reality from the beginning. And all of these fools who are about to get ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the revolution and the birth of the American Republic, when we know that there never was one, and what we're really celebrating is the 250 years. After 250 years, you're finally coming around to the realization that you don't live in a democracy and you don't live in a republic, and we weren't given a republic if we can keep it, because we can't keep it. We never tried to keep it. The founders, the originalists on the Supreme Court, decided that the founders totally meant this thing that they did not put anywhere in the Constitution. So, how's your day going? I don't know. It's a little bit of doomer stuff. But there's really no other way to approach it. This is what happened. So let's share some of the roundups of it. I mean, that's going to be tops in the news. And we should at least grab some of the prepared thoughts that have been offered to us here. There's Jamel Bowie right up at the top, meaning I put him in the queue last. So in reverse chronological order of the way I spotted them this morning. Mr. President, your get-out-of-jail-free card is ready. Letting him know. And by the way, you can now be executed if you don't answer the Diet Coke button fast enough. That is legal. National security is at stake. This is his piece for the New York Times, of course. And, you know what? I didn't see anybody recent enough in my scroll to bring up the Washington Post piece that everyone is complaining about the headline on. And I'm wondering if it's just easy to find off. You would think it would be easy to find on its front page, but they may have found out that it was dumb and buried it. Although what is on the front page in the opinion section here is what explains the genius of the American founders. That's a good question to ask right about now. And there's also one over here that says, how dangerous is the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity, from Alexei McCammond. But I don't see the one. I'm still scrolling here. I guess you can scroll forever on this front page. Well, if I see it come around again, I'll do it. I'll grab it. And if any of you see it floating around, send me the link so that I can look through it and whatever else. Oh, on the other hand, the most read opinion is God save us from this dishonorable court. So, there's that one too. Maybe it wasn't today's paper. Maybe it was yesterday's that they ran it in. This other dumb headline. Okay. So, let's start again then with Jamel Bowie, who writes, in 1977, nearly 3 years after leaving office in disgrace, and poor guy, he's not going to get those 3 years back when he was living in disgrace, nor the rest of his life, during which most people laughed at his infamous statement about the president doing it. It's not illegal. But anyway, this is the setup for it. 1977, 3 years after leaving office in disgrace, President Richard Nixon gave a series of interviews to David Frost, a British journalist. Of their hours-long conversation, only one part would enter history, but that probably bothered Nixon more than anything. When the president does it, Nixon told Frost, defending the conduct that ended his presidency, that means that it is not illegal. He went on to add that if the president, here's more of it, right? If the president approves an action because of the national security, or in this case, because of a threat to internal peace and order of significant magnitude, then the president's decision in that instance is one that enables those who carry it out to carry it out without violating a law. Otherwise, Nixon concluded, they're in an impossible position. Yesterday, in a 6-3 decision along partisan lines, you should be aware of that, of course, if you hadn't heard it already or guessed it, the Supreme Court affirmed Nixon's bold assertion of presidential immunity. It's been wrong for 50 years, or however long it's been now, 70, nearing 50 years. But it's right now. But, of course, wink, wink, it was right all along. You just didn't know it. The whole world went on for 50 years as though that was an absurdity. But it was, in fact, the law as the founders intended it, we know this now, thanks to the fifth dimensional Supreme Court, the fifth dimensional circuit / Supreme Court. Okay. Ruling on the federal prosecution of Donald Trump for his role in the effort to overturn the results of the 2020 election, Chief Justice John Roberts explained that the president has absolute immunity for official acts, whatever those might be, when those acts relate to the core powers of the office. But P.S., by the way, you should know that Donald Trump is already insisting that the immunity applies to everything. And everything he does is official. Maybe even if he did it before he was president. But we'll get to that in a minute. From the decision yesterday, we conclude that under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office, Roberts writes, at least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers. This immunity must be absolute. As for his remaining official actions, he is also entitled to immunity. So I know that sounds a little weird, but shut up. There's no appeal. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. The majority divides official conduct from unofficial conduct, which is still liable for prosecution. And say, we're not unreasonable, right? You can still be prosecuted for unofficial conduct, like if you're a Democrat. That's unofficial. It doesn't define the scope of unofficial conduct, and it places strict limits on how courts and prosecutors might try to prove the illegality of a president's unofficial acts. In dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives. Roberts writes, such an inquiry would risk exposing even the most obvious instances of official conduct to judicial examination on the mere allegation of improper purpose, thereby intruding on the Article 2 interests that immunity seeks to, it says protest. Seeks to protest? Was that supposed to be protect? I don't know. In other words, the why of a president's action cannot be held as evidence against him, even if they're plainly illegitimate. That seems unnecessary. Roberts tries to apply this new, seemingly extra-constitutional standard to the facts of the case against the former president. He says that the president has exclusive authority and absolute discretion to decide which crimes to investigate and prosecute. Interestingly, as opposed to the old stupid idea where the Department of Justice was more or less independent and ought to be left to its own devices. And although that one was always a little murky, it was more aspirational than anything else. But, we no longer aspire to that. Now the president should, in fact, have direct and exclusive authority and absolute discretion as well to decide which crimes to investigate and prosecute, including with respect to allegations of election crime. Gee whiz, that's not too much of a gift. And may discuss potential investigations and prosecutions with Justice Department officials, effectively neutering the idea of an independent federal law enforcement. Turning to Trump's attempt to pressure Mike Pence into delaying the certification of the Electoral College, Roberts says that this, too, was an official act, which is really puzzling, of course. But, by the way, just for clarity's sake, what he's talking about first here, the idea of talking to federal Justice Department officials about prosecutions, investigations, including about electoral law and about elections in general. But this is clearly that it would be okay, for instance, for him to be discussing with top DOJ officials, I want you to follow the advice offered by, Jeffrey Clark, and send Georgia a letter saying, we've found major fraud, you should reconvene your legislature and withdraw your electoral votes and wait for further instructions. And they said, well, we'll resign if you send that letter. I mean, they can still resign, and he can still send, but the point here is that he could send the letter and say, I just felt it was appropriate. I mean, he may or may not have a Jeffrey Clark to point to, but it doesn't require that there be one. His discussing this election outcome with the head of the environmental law section with the intent of firing everyone who outranks him such that that guy from the environmental law section becomes the acting attorney general. Where's my, there we go, the acting attorney general, right. That's all fine and within the scope of, well, you remember the old unitary executive theory. That gets a nod in Alito's writing and all of this. I don't know if it shows up in Jamel Bouie's summary of what happened. Then, of course, but what you might say, well, what about the pressuring of Mike Pence and telling him that he had the authority unilaterally to either reject electoral college votes that weren't for Trump, or simply declare math to be wrong and therefore Trump to be the president, or to throw, at the minimum, throw up his hands and say, I can't tell the difference between the fake electoral college certificates and the real ones. You guys are going to have to break up into the House and Senate and determine which ones to count. Whatever it was, he was asking Mike Pence essentially to do things that were not, at least until yesterday, not, and still today, there's no decision that says that this was within the scope of the vice president's powers. It's a ministerial function. The casting of the votes has been done by the authority to whom that act has been delegated, to whom that power has been delegated, and the counting of the votes is, one, math, and two, delegated to the Congress and not the vice president, though he is president of the Senate, true, but it doesn't explicitly extend this power. Most people just sort of think the the casting of the votes has been done. The counting of the votes has been done, given that we all know how the states voted, and they did so openly, and we can do the math ourselves. But the Congress then gets together and says, well, it's not enough for newspaper reporters to gather the news of the 50 states and add them together and declare the winner of the Electoral College to be the president. The government has got to declare who the president is going to be. And so they do that, and they have a little ceremony where all the envelopes are opened and the math is confirmed, and the person that everybody knows won the presidential election because they did the math based on the news reports. Now they say, all right, rather than basing it on news reports, we will now base it on the fact that I have in my hands a paper certificate signed by the governor that attests to the validity of the paper that says that the electoral votes of this state have been cast for this person. That's something that's official. Here, I can show it to you, can prove it. I'm going to archive these things. That's why it's done this way instead of, well, everybody knows XYZ. Everybody does know. And then, of course, there's the oddball situation where there's nobody that's got 270 electoral votes, but we would all know that that was coming too. In other words, this is not at all clearly within the scope of Mike Pence's official duties, but he's being exhorted to it nonetheless by Donald Trump. And the excuse is, well, it absolutely is an official act because, I don't know, because the guy who's doing it is the president, essentially, just like Nixon said. I'm asking you to, what this is supposed to be aiming at is, I order the CIA to conduct some clandestine operation somewhere. And it results in something that you could otherwise potentially be charged with a crime for. How dare you? How could you the president couldn't do his job, and nor could the intelligence community do their job if they were constantly worried that they could be prosecuted for these things. This is a core function of what the intelligence services does. It's a core function of national security and core function of what the president does. But also, so is throwing out the basic framework of how presidential succession works. That is now also part of the official scope of duties of the President of the United States. I'll determine how we determine who succeeds me in office. That is clearly a core function of the job. It is clearly not. It is delegated to someone else entirely. The president doesn't himself. They could have written it this way. It was available in the constitutional to the framers of the Constitution. They could have said, yes, the current president will stand and in this singular case preside over the joint session of Congress for the counting of the electoral votes. One, they could have done that. Not that it was clear that the job would be anything more than ministerial there either, but instead they gave it to the vice president by virtue of his position as president of the Senate. It was a separation of powers thing, kind of, but, they didn't want the one person standing as the judge of their own election, for one thing. But maybe they did. You know what? I mean, sure, why not? You know what? I changed my mind. Yes, they absolutely did want that, and that's it. It's foolish to discuss the rest of it. Now, our ordinary understanding was they wanted someone else, not necessarily independent of the president, although they didn't have the same conception of the vice presidency at the framing as they do now. But the point is that Article 1 would be counting the votes and determining who would head the Article 2 executive. They could have let the Article 2 executive count it themselves, but that felt disingenuous and foolish, and that wasn't what they decided. But I guess if the Supreme Court said, you know what, that was what they decided, we'd be stuck with that. Which seems a little dumb. And maybe not in keeping with, the way they framed the Constitution. Okay, let's get back to Jamel Bouie on this one, though. The thing that set us off on this tangent was turning to Trump's attempt to pressure Mike Pence and turning that into an official act is also problematic. Now, having made this distinction, if they made one at all, between official and unofficial conduct, Chief Justice Roberts, remands the case back to a federal district court so that it can re-examine the facts and decide whether any conduct described in the indictment against Trump is prosecutable. So where does it go? In one case, the election overturning the 2020 election case goes, I guess, back to Tanya Chutkan. They'll seek to apply this across the board, of course, also in the documents case down in Florida in front of Eileen Cannon, and I guess we all know what she's going to do with it. But there's more. We'll get to that. The upshot of the decision is that it will delay the former president's trial past the election. And if Trump wins, he can quash the case, rendering it moot if he wins the election, or if he just seizes power, right? Okay. And it's okay for him to just seize power, because once he does that, that too will have been an official act. The conservative majority on the Supreme Court has, in other words, successfully kept the American people from learning in a court of law the truth of Trump's involvement on January 6th, which they already have. I mean, it wasn't the Supreme Court that did it up until now, but as I reminded you yesterday, Steve Bannon is in prison right now, which he prefers to confessing to you what he knows about January 6th and what Donald Trump did on that day and leading up to that day, as is Peter Navarro in prison right now, rather than actually confess what he knows about Donald Trump and January 6th. So there's lots of people obstructing our knowledge and understanding of what actually happened on January 6th, and now the Supreme Court joins them in that. The Supreme Court, as Jamel says, successfully kept the American people from learning in a court of law the truth of Trump's involvement on January 6th. But more troubling than the court's interference in the democratic process are the disturbing implications of the majority's decision, which undermines the foundation of Republican government. And, a lot more as well. But we're fading out, so we'll come back in 2 minutes and give you the rest. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Or, maybe it's been the Donald Trump show all along. Maybe, that was decided 250 years ago. I don't know. You never can tell when you might have been pre-wrong the whole time. Let me see if I can find, I'm trying to think. I still haven't come up with that Washington Post headline that everybody was complaining about, but I'm wondering if some of you, I'm just searching through the timelines of people that I typically follow and see active in the morning and see whether they, in fact, also retweeted this thing. But so far, I'm having no luck. I'm sure I saw it, but I don't know if it's going to clear anything up for us. Okay, well, let's continue on with what Jamel Bowie was telling us about this. As we were fading out into the break, we were finding out that he was telling us more troubling than the court's interference in the democratic process are the disturbing implications of the majority's decision, which undermines just the old foundations of Republican government, at the same time that it purports to be a strike in defense of the constitutional order, which is fun, isn't it? Presidential immunity from criminal prosecution does not exist in the Constitution. Justice Sonia Sotomayor observes in her dissent. Remember that the originalists are the show me in the Constitution where it says blah, blah, blah crowd. Never mind, though. The historical evidence, she writes, cuts decisively against it. By definition, the president was bound by law. He was, first and foremost, not a king. He was a servant of the public. And like any other servant, the framers believed he was subject to criminal prosecution if he broke the law. And forget the framers. Remember that particularly in his second impeachment trial for staging the insurrection, Republicans in the Senate said he's clearly guilty of doing this thing, but this is an inappropriate forum for addressing it. The president will be the ex-president shortly. And in fact, by the time they came around to making the decision on the verdict, he already was the ex-president. And they said he'll be held accountable in the courts. This isn't the proper forum. A lot of them said, well, not a lot of them, but a couple of them, a critical mass of them, Republicans, said he's clearly guilty of this thing, but you can't impeach an ex-president. Now, of course, you can impeach an ex-president. And that was the least ridiculous of or by far the less ridiculous of these two assertions side by side. Can you impeach an official who is out of office? The answer is yes, you can, and there are many reasons for it, but there's also precedent for doing it. It's been done, so the answer is yes. Though that impeachment could now be dismissed as improvidently granted, I suppose, on review. But at any rate, can you impeach a person who's out of office? Yes. And then the other assertion that struck some people as improbable and unlikely. But at the same time, if you had asked them then, is a president above the law? Is there presidential immunity for staging this coup? Remember, we just had to shoot somebody right outside the doors here in order to prevent them from breaking in and doing God knows what while we were counting the Electoral College votes. The place is in a shambles. Feces smeared on the walls. Cops dead. Well, I guess they weren't dead at that point, but they were dead very shortly thereafter. People dead, trampled in the street. The offices trashed. The Senate pages had to run away with the Electoral College certificates to try to lock them down. The vice president, yards and seconds away from being grabbed by a mob that was chanting "Hang Mike Pence" and had erected, depending on, and forget the structural integrity of what they had constructed outside, but constructed a gallows, were now roaming the halls of the Congress, chanting "Hang Mike Pence," looking for him. All of that. It was fine, though, because he would be held accountable in the courts of law. But as it turns out, they were all pre-wrong, too, but they were also now, at this point, wink, wink, we knew all along that he was immune from that. And no, so impeachment isn't the right forum. The courts aren't the right forum. Article 3 can't try him. Article 2 will just pardon himself. Article 1 can't try him. There's just no, sorry. Can Article 4 try him somehow? There is an Article 4. There's an Article 5, too. But they don't have any powers. They're not populated. They're not branches of government. But anyway, what the hell? Who knows? You know what? I think James Madison said that somehow the Article 4 can prosecute the president. It doesn't make any sense. No one knows who an Article 4 official would be. But what the hell? We're just going to make that up. And from now on, you can do it. Yeah, it's as reasonable as anything else. So where we left off in Jamel Bowie's writing, right? Presidential immunity from prosecution doesn't exist in the Constitution. And while the majority might say here that the president is still subject to criminal prosecution for unofficial acts, Sotomayor aptly notes that the Chief Justice has created a standard that effectively renders nearly every act official if it can be tied in some way, however tenuously, to the president's core powers. Like the core power to have sex with porn stars. If the president takes official action whenever he acts in ways that are, quote, not manifestly or palpably beyond his authority, even though he was acting to try to make Mike Pence take action that was manifestly and palpably beyond his authority. And if in dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives, then, Sotomayor writes, under that rule, any use of official power for any purpose, even the most corrupt purpose indicated by objective evidence of the most corrupt motives and intent, remains official and immune. Oops, maybe our rule is stupid. A president who sells cabinet positions to the highest bidder is immune. Oh, that's a good idea. I should do that. A president who directs his IRS to harass and investigate his political rivals is immune. That is a good idea, and I've already had that idea. And then, in fact, I think I thought I already had that power, and I intended to use it in my first administration, but some people got lazy, but I'm definitely going to use it in my second. A president who gives his military illegal orders to suppress protesters is immune. Unless, of course, they say this is so illegal and infuriating, and because he can't be impeached and he can't be tried in courts, the only remedy, I've read my Benjamin Franklin, the only remedy is for us, in this case, the military, to take care of things instead. Not only, we won't obey the illegal orders, and we, might, let's say, suppress the evidence that such an order was ever given with bullets. Anyway, these examples only scratch the surface of allowable conduct under the majority's decision. The court, Sotomayor writes, effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding. Whoops, uh-oh. When he uses his official powers in any way, she continues, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. He actually, most likely actually did that one. Didn't organize a military coup to hold on to power, but did try. But instead organized a civilian coup to hold on to power. Anyway, the bottom line, Sotomayor concludes, is that the relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law, unless, of course, the Supreme Court decides that they're not in an individual case, which is entirely possible. I mean, like everyone has said, Biden should use the power now. He should assassinate Trump and prove that either prove the whole thing was wrong and end up getting prosecuted, or at the very least getting rid of Trump, right? So there is that. That's the silver lining there. But the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court. Their whole ruling was ridiculous and without foundation. So, could you put Biden on trial for using SEAL Team 6 to eliminate Trump? Yep. And if it made it all the way up to the Supreme Court and Biden said, but you said, we didn't mean that. You're out. You're under arrest. Could they do it? Yep, they could. Would it have to make sense? Nope, it wouldn't. Not in our system, which is a little bit weird. And actually, the time may have come to look back and say, are we sure that there's no check at all on decisions rendered by the Supreme Court? I don't know about that. I don't know how we would build it, but I don't know if it's a good idea. The answer we have is not a good one. Let's try again. Anyway, if a president, of course, is king, then we are subjects whose lives and livelihoods are only safe insofar as we don't incur the wrath of the executive. And if we find ourselves outside the light of his favor, and we do, then we have, found, it should be, it says find, but we have found ourselves in effect outside the protection of the law. Oh no, I thought that it applied to everyone. Equal protection under law. I believe they've carved that somewhere, like in the bathroom stall at the Supreme Court or something, equal protection under law. It may be elsewhere. I'm not certain where they carved it. Anyway, Roberts says that presidential immunity from criminal prosecution is necessary to preserve the separation of powers, but screw that, and protect the energy of the executive. Ooh, energy. I feel it's like vibes. Great. But the aim of separation of powers was not merely to create exclusive spheres of action in each branch. If this were true, the Senate, which ratifies treaties and confirms executive branch appointments, would not exist in its current form, but to prevent the emergence of unchecked authority. That's what checks and balances, or what the separation of powers is about, to prevent the emergence of unchecked authority. Roberts has reversed this. Now, separation of powers requires the absolute power of the executive to act without checks, without balances, without limits. In their relentless drive to protect a Republican president and secure his power for a future administration, the conservative majority has issued a fundamentally anti-Republican, lowercase r, opinion. In doing so, it has made a mockery of the American constitutional tradition. By the end of his time in the White House, Nixon was a disgrace. But to the conservative movement, he was something of a hero, hounded out of office by a merciless liberal establishment. One way to tell the story of the Republican Party after Nixon is as the struggle to build a world in which a future Nixon... let me put that again. Start over. One way to tell the story of the Republican Party after Nixon is as the struggle to build a world in which a future Nixon could act unimpeded by law. That is something we refer to on the show as relitigating Watergate. Occasionally when we get back to this one. It's certainly in my written record. Lots of people have used the term, but yeah, relitigating Watergate, which was, by the way, interestingly enough, a long-term project of Dick Cheney's. And it is extraordinarily interesting to say, to note that relitigating Watergate was a Dick Cheney product, and the upshot of relitigating Watergate is that now an immune from everything Donald Trump is calling for trying Dick Cheney's daughter Liz for treason. So, leopard, face, what can I tell you? Sorry, Dick Cheney. You shot a guy in the face, and now a leopard is coming for your face and your daughter's face, as it turns out. The only person whose face isn't getting eaten, by the way, so far, anyway. I mean, I guess maybe the real lesson is wait long enough and leopards will eat every face. But so far, if you paint your face orange, that seems to fool the leopards. Maybe they're just not interested. So that's a thing. And people were imitating his length of tie and mode of dress. Maybe they'll start painting their faces orange now, too. I don't see why they aren't already. Quite honestly, I don't know why he doesn't think you're a rhino if you don't paint your face orange. I'd like to see him actually enforce that at rallies. Anyway, Roberts, to conclude, has done more than score a victory for Trump. He has scored a victory for the conservative legal project of a unitary executive of immense power. Besides Trump, he has vindicated the lawlessness of Republican presidents from Nixon to George W. Bush. Whoops. Guess we should have done something about that guy. The Nixonian theory of presidential power is now enshrined as constitutional law. This time, when the president does it, it really won't be illegal. So, what might he be able to do that won't be illegal? Well, it's a wide variety of things. The Supreme Court, in the first instance, meant, presumably, much of what he would be prosecuted by Jack Smith for, both the electoral, the overturning the vote results and the outcome of the election, the fake electors, etc., but also probably the documents case at Pervolago sex dungeon. But Trump has more expansive ideas than that, including, as we found out from the New York Times yesterday, just hours after the decision was rendered, Trump moves to overturn Manhattan conviction, citing immunity decision. What? That too? Former President Donald J. Trump took the action hours after a U.S. Supreme Court ruling granted him immunity for official acts committed in office. And as others have pointed out, the decision to pay off Stormy Daniels in the end was apparently taken while in office. So, got to be an official act, right? No, of course, the Supreme Court says, well, by the way, in defining our test and the limits of our rule, obviously the prosecution of Bill Clinton for perjury, for lying about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky while in office, that's obviously unofficial. Whereas Donald Trump making decisions to pay off porn stars so they don't tell anybody about his infidelities, that's an official act because his face is orange. I don't really know why exactly, but it is because these 6 justices were Republican appointed and remain loyal to the Republican Party. 3 in particular who, I guess, personally owe allegiance to Donald Trump. So there we are. Ben Protis and William Rashbaum team up for this article from late yesterday. Donald J. Trump began an effort on Monday to throw out his recent criminal conviction in Manhattan and postpone his upcoming sentencing. We are now, 9 days away? Citing a new Supreme Court ruling, just hot off the presses, that granted him broad immunity from prosecution for official actions he took as president, according to a person with knowledge of the matter. Now, in a letter to the judge overseeing the case, Merchan, right? Mr. Trump's lawyers sought permission, this is a little way from, actually making the motion, sought permission to file a motion to set aside the verdict, doing so just hours after the Supreme Court issued its landmark ruling involving one of Mr. Trump's other criminal cases. Remember, this is a totally different one, and a totally different one than the Supreme Court had in mind when they issued this ruling. The letter will not be public until Tuesday, that's today, Tuesday at the earliest, after which prosecutors will have a chance to respond. The move from Mr. Trump's lawyers came 10 days before the judge was set to sentence the former president for his crimes in Manhattan, where a jury convicted him on 34 felony counts related to his cover-up of a sex scandal in the run-up to the 2016 election. Mr. Trump's lawyers asked the judge, Juan M. Merchan, to postpone the July 11th sentencing while the judge weighs whether the Supreme Court ruling affects the conviction. And there's really not much reason to think that it would, but supposing the court says, the Supreme Court says, in the end, you are wrong about how you considered that. I mean, there's lots of reasons not to. He's being tried under New York state law, not under federal law. It was certainly actions undertaken before he was president, and that most of the decision to actually put this payoff scheme in motion took place while he was a candidate and not yet president. Were there certain aspects of it that continued into the presidency? Yes. Did they have any impact on the official conduct of the presidency? Certainly no national security implications. No. But of course, you're free to just say yes to that. Like, there's a national security implication. An embarrassed president is weakened on the international stage. So there's some national security implication right there. Is that enough for John Roberts? I mean, I can't tell you for sure, but the answer is yes, of course. But we have to wait and see exactly how he would word his decision later on. But could you guess? You could probably guess. So anyway, right. So now Judge Merchan has to, according to Trump's lawyers, weigh whether the Supreme Court's decision saying, those other things that he's charged with in the Smith case he can't be tried for those things because reasons, but how about things he's already been tried for and convicted and is just awaiting sentencing? It's all adjudicated. Can we undo it all under state law? I don't know. We'll find out. The effort to set aside the conviction might be a long shot. I mean, so is presidential immunity, though. The Manhattan case centers on acts Mr. Trump took as a candidate, not president. Yet his lawyers are likely to argue that prosecutors built their case partly on evidence from his time in the White House. And under the Supreme Court's new ruling, this is a part we didn't discuss in Jamel Bouie's thing, but lots of other people have been discussing it. It's important to bring this up now. Under the Supreme Court's new ruling, prosecutors not only may not charge a president for any official acts, but also cannot cite evidence involving official acts to bolster other accusations. That is to say, to the extent that the jury became convinced of Trump's guilt for actions he took while he was a candidate, to the extent that actions that he took while president tended to establish that he did in fact break the law while a candidate, cannot be admissible as evidence. So, for instance, well, to try and clarify this as much as possible with a hypothetical, although the hypothetical comes, pretty close to the reality. If Trump, while president, so we're talking about 2017, is taped saying to Michael Cohen, "Boy, am I glad that I had you to help arrange the payoff to Stormy Daniels so that she wouldn't say anything about our affair, so that we could interfere with the election of 2016 and I could win rather than lose. That was a great idea. Please make sure that she's paid and up to date and continues to stay silent. Otherwise, I'll be embarrassed and have to leave the White House or face the fact that I was elected under suspect circumstances, perhaps illegitimate circumstances, and deal with that. But thank you for helping arrange that payoff. Thank you for helping disguise the payoff as wages to you. That you've done an incredible service to me personally." That tape wouldn't be admissible as evidence because it was recorded while he was president, and he says it was an official act, thanking Michael Cohen for doing that. And it has national security implications. Can't be used as evidence. And so therefore, all you have is everything that he did before he was president. Now, of course, a lot of what he did before president is, well, here's the check that he wrote, and here's the agreement for Stormy Daniels to stay silent, and here are Alan Weisselberg's notes about how he's going to shift money around so they can disguise the nature of the payment, and here are the FEC reports filed while he was a candidate that falsely assert that this is a payment to Michael Cohen for services rendered, and that's not true. There is all that evidence, but further evidence that they did in fact use, not entirely unrelated to my hypothetical of a total confession, but anyway, additional information that was used by the jury to solidify their decision could theoretically now be viewed as having been impermissible all along because, of course, James Madison, way back in the 1700s, said it would be. Later on, 250 years hence, you would all discover finally that evidence is inadmissible in court. And if that was inadmissible in court, it's difficult for us to tell whether or not the jury would have convicted him based on everything that took place before his entrance into the presidency. And by the way, if they did, maybe that's illegal too somehow. But we can't tell, so we have to throw out the verdict and either retry the case or set the whole thing aside. It is unclear, to get back to the article here, how the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which brought the case, will respond, or whether the judge will delay the first sentencing of an American president. But Mr. Trump's effort appeared to cause at least a brief interruption. The District Attorney's Office did not, on Monday, make a sentencing recommendation to the judge about whether to imprison Mr. Trump, as was expected. A spokeswoman for the District Attorney's Office declined to comment. It might be too late for Justice Merchant to revisit the conviction. The deadline for filing post-trial motions was last month, and it is unclear whether the judge will seriously entertain the motion, even in light of the High Court's decision. Instead, he might direct Mr. Trump's lawyers to raise the issue when they appeal the conviction after he is sentenced, which of course will happen and would have happened anyway. The sentencing is likely to be the only moment of criminal accountability that the 4 times indicted former president will face before Election Day, when he hopes to reclaim the White House. Mr. Trump faces up to 4 years in prison, but could receive probation on the convictions for falsifying business records, among the lowest levels of felonies. Mr. Trump's other criminal cases are mired in delay, and the Supreme Court ruling on Monday will almost certainly postpone his trial in Washington, where he is accused of plotting to subvert the 2020 election, which is, not much of a crime, really. In the Manhattan case, the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, will eventually submit his recommendation to Justice Merchant, but it is unclear whether those legal papers will be public. Unlike in federal court, sentencing papers in New York state courts are generally confidential unless the judge authorizes their release. That means the world may not learn of Mr. Bragg's recommendation until Justice Merchant sentences Mr. Trump, as he is expected to do just days before Mr. Trump is to be formally nominated for president at the Republican National Convention. The judge faces an unprecedented conundrum with equally unprecedented legal and political ramifications. His decision is sure to alienate broad swaths of the country, no matter what it is. Imprisoning Mr. Trump could exacerbate the nation's political divisions. Better do it, though, at this point. Yet, if Justice Merchan spares him, it could give the impression that the former president received special treatment. Mr. Trump's frontrunner status in the 2024 presidential campaign further compounds the judge's dilemma, raising the prospects that his decision could shape the race and its outcome. That's okay. Other judges are shaping the race and its outcome. You should too. And by the way, those people who did it call themselves justices. And so do you. Different reasons, but what can you do? That's the way it is. The judge, a former prosecutor who occasionally clashed with Mr. Trump and his lawyers, has several options at his disposal. Trump could face a few months in jail or several years in prison, but it's just as likely that he won't ever see the inside of a cell. There is no requirement that the judge impose time behind bars, and Justice Merchan could sentence him to home confinement or probation. He could also postpone any sentence until after the election, or after Mr. Trump serves his second term in office, should he be reelected. A sitting president, of course, cannot be required to serve time unless, he's a Democrat and the judges decide actually the founders meant that he should be able to serve time. After Mr. Bragg submits his recommendation, Trump's lawyers are entitled to respond with their own recommendation. It is unclear whether that submission will be confidential as well. The judge could draw on feedback from the New York City Probation Department, which met with Mr. Trump last month and will make its own confidential recommendation for his sentence. Several factors are working in Trump's favor. A major one is that he is a first-time felon. Well, first-time convict. First-time felon convicted of a non-violent crime. On the other hand, Mr. Trump's behavior before and during the trial could cost him his freedom. He has shown no remorse and on 10 separate occasions violated a gag order that prohibited him from attacking jurors, prosecutors, and witnesses, including the prosecution's star witness, Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen. A jury of 12 New Yorkers convicted Mr. Trump of falsifying records related to the hush money deal that he and Mr. Cohen carried out in the final days of the 2016 presidential campaign. Mr. Cohen paid the money to a porn star, Stormy Daniels, to silence her story of a sexual encounter with Mr. Trump, who then falsified the records to conceal his repayment to Mr. Cohen. It was arguably the least consequential of Trump's 4 criminal cases. Of course, you know about the other ones, but it is the most likely the only one he'll face before Election Day. The Supreme Court's ruling on Monday sent his Washington case back to a lower court to decide whether Trump's actions were in an official or in a private capacity. We'll conclude with this one in a minute. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and welcome back to the end of this piece from the New York Times. We just had a paragraph or two left before finishing here. We left off by saying that the Supreme Court's ruling on Monday sends this Washington case, that would be the Jack Smith prosecution for the election overturning the election being the charge here, the insurrection. The Supreme Court's ruling on Monday sets this insurrection case back to Chutkan's court, right, to decide whether Mr. Trump's actions were official or unofficial. And it seems pretty obvious that no matter what Judge Chutkan rules, they will appeal it to the Supreme Court until it gets thrown out as immune. The Supreme Court ruling was the latest legal victory for Trump, who also recently benefited from Justice Merchan's loosening the gag order, allowing the former president to resume his attacks on witnesses and jurors in the case. Once the judge imposes Trump's sentence, he will lift the gag order entirely, enabling Trump to take aim at prosecutors and their families as well. On July 12th, Mr. Bragg, a Democrat, is expected to testify before Congress, where Mr. Trump's Republican allies are expected to assail the case as a politically motivated witch hunt. Terrific. So we have that to look forward to as well. Yes, so now the case goes back to Chutkan, and I guess eventually the case in Florida will go back to Elena Kagan to decide, she'll have her work cut out for her. How will I hammer the documents case into official acts, the official acts protection. It's not that hard to do. You just say it's true, and that's enough. Chutkan, by the same token, Tanya Chutkan could say, I find the opposite. I find it to be an unofficial act, and go forward with the trial. Now, that's a suggestion that's been made before and is made again. This email that I got this morning from our good friend Christine on 16, who says, this New York Times article, which she includes a link for here, remakes the case made by Joyce Vance in the Substack that I, Christine, sent to you, that being me, last month, where she argued, and I think we read it, that even if the Supreme Court sends the case back down to Chutkan, which has now happened, and so delays the trial further, which has now happened, she can still call an evidentiary hearing right now, and in fact now she's obligated to air all the evidence against Trump in full public view well before the election. Let's hope she does it with all the drama of the January 6th hearings. Can she? Well, remember, the ball is now back in her court. The Supreme Court remanded that case back to Chutkan with the instructions, you need to now determine the difference between official and unofficial acts. The idea here being you will be under tremendous pressure to find them all to be official acts and therefore immune. Please do that. If you do not do that, we will reverse you eventually. But that just opens the window, as they correctly point out, for Judge Chutkan to say, well, she could regard it this way. I don't know if she will regard it this way. I don't know what kind of person she is. But for all the legal experts, practitioners, etc., who are like, well, this ruling is upside down backwards, out of the blue, totally, I don't know what to say about it other than it reverses everyone's understanding of the law. So lots of things should be reversed, like judicial deference to higher courts at this point. And you wouldn't be out of keeping with the actual system that we've always used to say, well, it's up to me. That the Supreme Court has directed me to hold these evidentiary hearings and decide what's official and what's not. And I decide that it's all unofficial. Now, it seems pretty clear to me that in the heads I win, tails you lose world that the Supreme Court has set up for us, that they or someone in between us, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, might reverse me, but I'm gonna be reversed. That's the path I've chosen. Would it jeopardize my career as a federal judge in the future? It might, although, it never, I don't know what Tanya Chutkan thinks her chances were of being promoted to an appeals court, whether D.C. or any of the circuits in the future. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know if that was in the cards for her, but she could say, if it was in the cards, to hell with it. I'm going to be reversed on something, but I'm going to make a statement. Or, of course, she could decide, well, if there's ever a Democratic president again, I have no real reason to believe that would ever be the case under this scheme. But if it were to be the case, maybe I'd be a national hero for doing this. I don't know. And maybe be promoted, maybe not. But she is entitled at the moment to say, well, let's have a thorough and loud investigation into what I should decide about the nature of these offenses. Let's all consider the offenses committed by the President of the United States, the then President of the United States, Donald Trump, everyone, and very publicly decide. I mean, you could also have a very public discussion of that and then say, they're official acts, but they happened, and they happened just as described in sordid detail in front of everybody over the last 3 months. It could just be the case that between now and, let's say, Election Day, every single day in Judge Tanya Chutkan's courtroom in Washington, D.C. is an outpouring of the dirtiest secrets Donald Trump ever hoped to conceal from the American public, at the end of which, let's say the election is held and Donald Trump seizes power one way or another, and Tanya Chutkan, in a vain effort to save her neck because she'd never be forgiven, says, well, despite the dirt and disgustingness of the Trump record, I now hold that they were all official acts and he's immune. That won't save her, but that's a compromised position, though she might as well go all the way and say, nope, it's official, and his trial begins today, and we'll see what happens between now and January 20th, or whatever. But there you have it. That's out there as a concept. Let's see. To remind you of what, I think we did read this one. She includes a link to Joyce Vance's earlier article from April 26th of this year, in which she writes, at least at the outset, that today, April 26th, we focus on Trump's appeal to the Supreme Court after Judge Chutkan denied his motion to dismiss the special counsel's election interference case, claiming that he has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution as a former president. Back on April 26th, that was dumb, and the founders never meant it. It is now July 2nd, and it is super smart, and the founders totally meant it, but okay. It was a sobering experience, Joyce writes, even with a court, that is the Supreme Court, that has shown a propensity to abandon first principles, precedent, history, common sense, and the good of the American people when their political allegiances demand it. So that was prescient. The outcome of the case is far from certain. The argument was disheartening. I had the interesting experience of commenting on the argument on location in the Senate swamp, the outdoor filming location, across the street from the court. There's a picture, I guess, of the set where it was happening. The location came complete with a protester who loudly yelled "fake news" at us for several hours, a sign of the times. This is a court that's concerned with future presidents and the rules that guide their conduct as much as they are with Trump. In fact, the argument was oddly devoid of mention of the former president by name. Usually, an oral argument focuses on a defendant and his conduct. Not so here. This was all about future presidents and how they would execute their constitutional duties. The 6 conservative justices left Donald Trump on the periphery for the most part, with the possible exception of Justice Amy Coney Barrett, which that too may have been prescient. I know everybody's still writing about her being somehow the exception to the ultra-right bloc, and how she alone seems to have, I don't know, I chalk it up to, well, she's a woman, so she actually had to work hard in law school, whereas the other guys probably didn't, not quite as much, and she actually learned the stuff and took it to heart, and they glided through and said, I'm just going to make a career for myself, doing the bare minimum as a federal judge, and if I make it to the Supreme Court because I'm sufficiently loyal Republican, great. Whereas she actually had to, bust her ass, and she takes it seriously. How come you guys didn't learn this stuff? And she occasionally sticks to principle, but not so much here. Anyway, so you remember the piece? I think I do. I remember that part about the fact that the justices really had no interest in what Donald Trump actually did in a case about Donald Trump. They wanted to make it about anything but Donald Trump. But make no mistake about it, she continues, the case is all about Donald Trump and whether he can be prosecuted for the most serious of his crimes against the American people, trying to hold on to power after losing the 2020 election. It's also about the legacy of the Roberts Court and whether history will view the already unpopular justices as the court that gave away democracy. Well, it will. Anyway, more description about how she viewed the proceedings that day. But let's go back to the other article that Christine included, a New York Times piece entitled, Ruling Further Slows Trump Election Case, but Opens Door to Airing of Evidence. So, we got that going for us, which is nice. The Supreme Court's immunity decision directed the trial court to hold hearings on what portions of the indictment can survive, a possible chance for prosecutors to set out their case in public before Election Day. And that might be just as good as anything, right? Okay, well, we won't have a verdict, but what if the entirety of the election season is a criminal, or not a criminal trial, but an airing of all of the charges and exactly what the circumstances were? Oh, we don't know how the decision is going to come out on whether they were official acts or not. But 3 months, 4 months of continually scrutinizing each of these actions and laying out the case, because it might be your only chance, well, that's not such a bad idea. Alan Fuhr is the author of this piece, and it goes like this. The Supreme Court's decision on Monday about executive immunity makes it all but certain that former President Donald J. Trump will not stand trial on charges of seeking to overturn the last election before voters decide whether to send him back to the White House in the next one, although it may not be voters that decide that. But the ruling also opened the door for prosecutors to detail much of their evidence against Mr. Trump in front of a federal judge and the public at an expansive fact-finding hearing, perhaps before Election Day. It remains unclear when the hearing, which was ordered as part of the court's decision, might take place or how long it would last. But it will address the big question that the justices kicked back to the trial court, which is how much of Mr. Trump's indictment can survive the ruling that former presidents enjoy immunity for official action that they take in office. And it will be held in federal district court in Washington in front of the judge, Tanya S. Chutkan, who was handling the case before it was frozen more than 6 months ago as a series of courts considered his immunity claims. Almost from the moment that Judge Chutkan was assigned the case, she moved it forward expeditiously, showing little patience for Trump's efforts to delay it or his complaints that it was getting in the way of his campaign. At one point, she told the former president that his day job as a candidate would not affect her administration of the case, later declaring, "This trial will not yield to the election cycle." Mr. Trump's lawyers will no doubt seek to narrow the scope of the proceeding and push it off for as long as possible. And if he wins the presidency again, he could avoid the proceeding altogether by ordering the Justice Department to drop the entire case. But if Judge Chutkan sticks to her practice of dealing quickly with procedural matters and is able to schedule the hearing for September or October, it could lead to something extraordinary, a mini trial of sorts, unfolding in the nation's capital in what could be the home stretch of the presidential campaign. Whenever the hearing is ultimately held, and however it ends up being structured, it will focus on the question at the center of the Supreme Court's decision, whether the myriad allegations in Mr. Trump's 45-page indictment were based on official acts that he took in his role as president, or on unofficial acts in his private role as a candidate for office. Prosecutors face no restrictions in pursuing charges that emerge from unofficial acts, allegedly, but the justices have ruled that they have to use evidence and argument to overcome the presumption that Mr. Trump is immune from prosecution on official acts. Well, so the entirety of their presentation will be, no, we think he isn't immune, and here are the reasons why. That's not a bad way to spend your time. When the special counsel, Jack Smith, filed the elections charges against Mr. Trump last summer, the indictment accused the former president of using 5 primary methods to subvert the results of the 2020 race. In its ruling, the Supreme Court decided there was no question that Mr. Trump enjoyed immunity from being prosecuted for one of those methods: his efforts to strong-arm the Justice Department into validating his false claims that the election had been marred by widespread fraud. That was because the justices determined that Mr. Trump's interactions with top officials in the department were clearly part of his official duties as president. But the justices left Judge Chutkan, who was appointed by President Barack Obama, with the substantial task of performing the official-unofficial test for the other 4 methods described in the indictment. Those include Mr. Trump's attempts to use lies about election fraud to persuade state officials to change the result of the race, as well as his plan to create false slates of electors declaring that he won in several swing states that he actually lost. They also include Mr. Trump's campaign to pressure his vice president, Mike Pence, into throwing the election his way during a certification proceeding in the Capitol on January 6th, and once that effort failed, his attempts to exploit the violence and chaos that erupted at the Capitol to further delay the election certification. A hearing encompassing all of that could easily take several days, or even a matter of weeks to complete. I think that it should take months, if you start now. And it could result in testimony not only from Mr. Pence and his advisors, but also from a cast of characters including lawyers and campaign aides who were part of the fake elector scheme, and state officials who were subject to arm twisting by Mr. Trump. If Judge Chutkan allows the most expansive version of the hearing to be held, and why not, it could look a lot like a full-on trial of Mr. Trump, lacking only a jury to render a verdict. Mr. Trump's lawyers have had enormous success in postponing proceedings in 3 of 4 criminal cases he is facing, and they will no doubt try their best to put off the fact-finding hearing in front of Judge Chutkan. Only his case in Manhattan has gone to trial so far, resulting in his conviction in May on 34 charges of falsifying business records to cover up, a sex scandal that threatened to derail his 2016 bid for office. Judge Chutkan forcefully rejected Trump's initial claims of immunity last winter, saying that they had no basis in American law or history. But of course, the problem now is that they do have a basis in American law. Not history, not yet. Yesterday doesn't count as history yet, I don't think. But there they are, nonetheless. There's no basis in American law or history, but the ruling is there. There's still an order to do this. But even though she accused him of trying to usurp the reins of government, she had no choice but to put the case on hold when he started his lengthy process of appealing her decision. I'll just point out again here, we say things like she had no choice because she would almost certainly have been overruled and overturned by a higher court. That's not actually the same thing as having no choice. Go ahead and do it is a choice. It's not one that judges relish taking, but it is a choice. I mean, just like, what if we didn't count the electoral votes? Or what if we just lied and said we won the electoral college? That's a choice you can make. We keep saying you can't do it because eventually we think you'll be criminally charged for doing that and tried and convicted. But now we know you won't be. So I guess on the other hand, you could say maybe this is liberating. Well, national security won't be impacted because courts will take care of it. So I can conduct this inquiry any way I want, beginning whenever I want, and make it last as long as I want, and rule as ridiculously as I want. Because if I am meticulous and try to rule according to the state of the law, who knows what's going to happen? One, I don't know how to apply this law yet because it's brand new. It was made up yesterday. And 2, even if I apply it correctly and came to a reasonable conclusion, if the Supreme Court just didn't feel like they liked it, they will overturn it. So what's the difference? Just have a field day. Go for it. So where were we here? Oh, yes, right. So we had said that she had no choice but to put the case on hold. Once those challenges began, the challenges to her decision on immunity, starting in front of a federal appeals court in Washington, Judge Chutkan suggested to both the defense and the prosecution that when she regained control of the case, as she now has, she intended to give Trump an extra day of preparation for each day he had lost to the stay of proceedings before the start of the trial. If she sticks to that decision, and why the F would you do that? She will ultimately owe Mr. Trump an additional 82 days of preparation time before any trial could begin, equivalent to the period between December 13th, when the case was first frozen, and the originally scheduled trial date of March 4th. But there is no trial date at the moment, and Judge Chutkan would likely start counting those 2.5 months only after she conducted her fact-finding hearing. Before the hearing is held, both sides will have to file motions to the judge setting forth their competing visions on which of the allegations are based on official acts and which are based on unofficial ones. And even before those substantive motions are filed, there could easily be time-eating preliminary arguments about setting the terms of the hearing and debating whether prosecutors will have to provide the defense with any additional discovery information before the hearing is held. In the end, even though the justices put Judge Chutkan in charge of conducting a hearing, any rulings she makes will be subject to appeal, meaning that if Mr. Trump is not elected again and the case continues, the final word on how much of the indictment will survive will come from the same Supreme Court that made that idiotic ruling yesterday. So there you have it. That all goes back to them. But that doesn't mean that in the meantime you can't make the record look entirely different. And, I guess you might as well just go ahead and paint that picture regardless of what you think might be repainted either after the election or after an appeal or whatever. The opportunity exists to define the nature of this case without interference between now and then. Well, I guess now that I'm saying it, I guess she could start holding the evidentiary hearings now with the intention of either doing it quickly or stretching it out. Or she could wait until September, October with the intention of doing it quickly or dragging it out. And at the same time, we could see this, an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court filed. Now, the Supreme Court just ordered Tanya Chutkan to hold this hearing. Could the Supreme Court say, I know. We said that we were going to have Judge Chutkan conduct this thing, but we're going to conduct it. I don't like the way this is going. We're grabbing it and taking it away from her and conducting it ourselves. Could they do it? Yeah, they could. Would they? I guess maybe. Maybe. Ordinarily, no. But this time, maybe. Who knows? Haha. LOL. There doesn't need to be a reason. I know. That's sad and doomerish. But, well, I can't prove that that's not how things would go at this stage of the game. Okay. Wow. Well, what a day. What can I tell you? Let's see. Meanwhile, we're coming to the end of our third segment. And if Joan McCarter has, if she's even willing to wake up and get out of bed today, and I mean, like I said, I can't blame her for deciding not to at this stage of the game, but she may also be compelled, I have a lot to say about this. Or she may say, well, for the moment, there's plenty to focus on elsewhere outside of what the Supreme Court just handed us. But frankly, it would be difficult to believe that her focus would be elsewhere. But other things are happening. And so, we'll give her the chance. But if she was sleeping in drunk, you couldn't believe her. Now, I've never had that happen, and I have no reason to believe that she would ever do such a thing. But now would be a great time to do it, if you ask me. All right, let's see. Any other stories that we think we should or could squeeze in between now and then? Well, of course, there's other views of this. By the way, just to report on this, to double back, news from Danbury, Connecticut. Steve Bannon did, in fact, report to prison yesterday, but not without holding a rally outside of the prison facility where Murdery Trader Green and others showed up to rally in support. And, dumb things were said. And then he went inside and became a federal prisoner. So there, you have that at least to cling to. Let's see. By the way, might as well throw this one out there as well. Fox News reporting that the Heritage Foundation is working on election legal challenges in case Biden gets pulled from the DNC nomination, right? This probably occurred to those of you following on the show since the other day when people began calling for Biden to potentially be replaced as the candidate due to this debate performance. And I mentioned the mechanics are very unclear. It hasn't been done, not in this particular way. Does that mean that you can't do it? No. Does it mean you shouldn't do it? No, not by itself. You might think that the calculus for the outcomes are bad, but extraordinary circumstances, et cetera, et cetera. We can't have that argument at the moment. But what we can remind you of is, remember, of course, that it wasn't that long ago that Ohio's Secretary of State said, the Democratic Convention is scheduled for after our deadline for locking in the nominees for printing the ballots for the November election. And it may be the case then that we can and should, by our law, even though we've bent it for everybody else, exclude Joe Biden from the ballot in Ohio unless something. They take some drastic action to officially nominate Joe Biden or to make him the nominee before that deadline passes. And my recollection is that the DNC did in fact go that route and say, all right, well, we will meet that deadline by doing something. I don't know whether they already did it. I can't remember the specifics from when we talked about it. But what this means is if you're replacing Biden on the ballot, at a minimum, Ohio and probably then some other states will follow and will say, now, wait a second. No, you can't put this other person's name on. You've already locked in Joe Biden. And you're going to have to go through the courts and sue the whole way through the election to redo that decision, and we may yet win. And it may be the case that, yeah, you've nominated somebody else, but Joe Biden is the name on the ballot in the Democratic line in Ohio and maybe some other states, and there's nothing you can do about it. And if you think that that's unfair, well, I remind you, the Supreme Court is crazy, so F you. Well, I guess they're working on it. Heritage Foundation working on election legal challenges in case Biden pulled from the DNC nomination at least 3 swing states. Georgia, wow, not them, can't believe it. Nevada and Wisconsin could restrict Biden's removal from the ballot. Didn't even mention Ohio here. Timothy Nerazi for Fox News pointing this out. We'll read a little bit from it on our way out into our third break and Jones segment. A major conservative activist group, if you think Heritage Foundation meets that definition, is preparing for legal battles in case the Democratic Party chooses to pull President Biden out of the running before or after he becomes the nominee. The Heritage Foundation is laying the groundwork in case a sudden switch up in the Democratic roster sparks a legal war. We are monitoring the calls from across the country for President Biden to step aside, either now or before the election, and have concluded that the process for substitution and withdrawal is very complicated. This, according to their project oversight manager, Mike Howell. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, they're easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. So we were in the middle of reading about the Heritage Foundation's plans here. I don't think there's anything else that's particularly revealing about this. They're basically just saying, that they've already, as they say, identified multiple states in which the switch away, if it were to happen before or after the convention, I guess, could mean serious trouble for the Democratic Party. So basically, they're going to be doing everything they can to exploit the situation and create legal problems and legal barriers to making any switch, which we already knew was going to be the case even without Republican interference. It was still going to be complicated and inexplicable, and there's no, clear defined path forward. That's one major obstacle and one major reason not to try to even bother at this point. But, of course, they were going to jump in and try and exploit this and make things worse. All right. Well, Joan McCarter has opted to get out of bed anyway, despite what happened yesterday. And I told everybody, look, I couldn't blame you. I'm not even certain. The only reason I got out of bed was to tell everybody that I just want you all to know there's no reason to get out. But there is, of course, and that is to stand up and go fight and promise to clobber people at the ballot box to the extent that matters for anything. And what else can you do? There's not much else. No other options. So good morning. How you doing, Joan?
I'm pretty much in the same place as you.
Yeah.
What's even the point?
Yeah, I know. And it's really, we say it rhetorically.
We say it rhetorically.
But
obviously,
also,
obviously
damn it.
We have to fight to save.
Yeah, we'll find the point
of our republic.
Yeah, but they're certainly making it difficult, and certainly for a decade now, it's been Calvin ball with the Republicans on everything, and we've always known that. And we've been able to scrape an existence out so far, and occasionally even elect a Democratic president. And look, the most you can do, perhaps the most you can do, is say, well, look, the election results were overwhelming in favor of the Democrats, and everybody can see that. And to the extent that they reject reality and attempt to take power anyway, Well, here it is. We present it to you. And are you mad about it, or would you rather watch The Bachelor? You tell us. Let's find out, I guess. And, also freed in a lot of ways in all of this, as I was mentioning before. There are federal judges who will have the opportunity to have cases tried in front of them, or begin preliminary pre-trial motion hearings and say, ordinarily I'm concerned about being reversed when precedent is clear, and I don't want to embarrass myself by being a bad judge and a bad lawyer and getting reversed. But I don't know whether being a good judge will prevent me from being admonished and reversed by a crazy Supreme Court. So I don't even know how to proceed. The best thing I can do is say, I think this is the way to go on principle, and let's decide the case this way. And if the Supreme Court wants to snatch it up and reverse it, what am I going to do? Nothing I can do about it, I don't think, except put the argument out there that these guys are crazy. This is the way the law has worked for 250 years. I'm going to go with that precedent. And if they just want to overturn it later, let everybody see them do it. So maybe, I don't know. Now Tanya Chutkan has this opportunity, as pointed out.
Yeah.
So I don't know what her schedule is like. And she's a normal person and by all reports, a decent and, as they say, sober judge. So it may be that she says, as much as I'd like to start on this right away, I have other trial obligations and I can't begin on this until September. But she's been ordered by the Supreme Court to start an inquiry into whether or not the actions charged were official. No outcome was dictated to her, except, wink, wink in the background. 6 justices said, well, you're ordered to conduct this inquiry. And of course, we all understand here that you're going to come to the conclusion that they were all official acts. And if by some chance you decide to flirt with danger and say that they aren't official acts, we will snatch the case back and say, yes, they were, but go ahead. And right now she says, I don't know, as dumb as it is, the Supreme Court has ordered me to hold this inquiry, so I'm going to hold it over an extended period and make it extraordinarily uncomfortable and painful for somebody. Somebody being, the guy who's charged with major crimes against the Republic. But, now we'll decide whether they were official crimes against the Republic or not. So, yeah, could be interesting.
Which ultimately can't happen before the election anyway, at this point.
Not the trial, I guess. Certainly not the trial.
Not the trial.
But as others were pointing out, the order was that we have evidentiary hearings at this point. So, okay, here we go. And oddly, we don't have to pause for selecting a jury at any point here. We just get right into it. So let's have some briefs from everybody. Why do you have the crazy position that the president is above the law and can commit any crime he wants, and up to and including the crime of saying that he's president even when he isn't, so that he can be immune? Tell me all about it. And, I get, there's really no reason why you couldn't drag that out. And I suppose if you're really worried about the collapse of the Republic, then I guess you also should say, I might not be a judge after, January of 2025. So I don't know whether I have a future to consider in terms of a career. I do have this opportunity to give the American public some information that might make it look like I have a shot at a career after January. Why not take it? So, I don't know.
It will be interesting to see what lower courts do. In response to this. One of the sort of puzzling now elements of this session of the court is how many times it slapped down the Fifth Circuit for just being wacky in applying the law.
Yes, that's true.
It's at odds with the rest of the momentous decisions momentous, horrible decisions coming out of the court that they said, there is a bar too far, and that's basically everything the Fifth Circuit has tried to do. Whether it's, say, the FDA can't regulate abortion pills or a number of things. That's just an aside, because I'm still sitting here just kind of gobsmacked trying to mull over exactly what all of this means.
Right. Well, I mean, they have done this. They have taken this action and slapped down the Fifth Circuit a lot, and in no uncertain terms, and from conservatives as much as anybody else. At the same time, they've essentially just reserved that power to do crazy stuff for themselves. Like, Fifth Circuit, you're overstepping. We're the crazy court of last appeal. You are supposed to just, hand us these cases to the extent that if anybody's going to become a conservative culture war hero for reversing these things, it's going to be us, not you. I don't want you guys becoming famous and replacing us. I don't know. I'm not certain what motivates it, but they're basically saying, for whatever reason, right now, we weren't looking to overturn this entire body of law, or at least not to have you do it for us. But these other bodies of law, well, we're okay with that, especially if we're the ones overturning them. But, okay, I don't know. It's difficult to reconcile, but maybe that helps explain it. We're the Supremes, you're not. That could be all there is to it.
Get co-kings with the president?
I guess so, yeah.
Or his Star Chamber.
Right, true. And, well, maybe we need to establish that. If we can't expand the Supreme Court, we'll say, well, can I tempt you with a Star Chamber? We might put you guys in it. Would that be okay? So, I mean, I guess they now have put themselves in a position. Ordinarily, I guess we have to consider this too, right? We keep saying, well, you got to expand the Supreme Court. They can do that. Congress can simply, by statute, expand the Supreme Court. It doesn't require a constitutional amendment. But I guess we're also now in the territory where, well, what if the Supreme Court just decides, no, that's not what it means. There's no textual support for it, but they overrule the expansion of the Supreme Court. Then what? I don't know. But I mean, I guess then you just say, oh, that's wrong.
Well, could a unitary executive say, guess what? The Supreme Court now has 15 members.
Sure. I mean,
it would be an official act.
Yes, that's true. But it would definitely be one that they don't like very much. And if it was done by a Democrat, this time it's you can be immune for official and unofficial acts, but rather than remand this to the district court to decide whether it was official or not, we'll just tell you, oh, it was unofficial. Oh, yeah. Feels super unofficial. And I think probably because it might even have been typed on Hunter Biden's laptop. That's how unofficial it was. So therefore, you're all under arrest for even typing it. I don't know. Once you get beyond, the idea that the 250 years of understanding of the limitations and the general outlines of the balance of separation of powers and what's constitutional and what's not, and we can just make that up starting today for no reason, okay, you're right. That's what makes this whole thing problematic. There's no way to analyze it.
No.
So all you can do is report that it did happen, and that's kind of where we are.
That's kind of where we are, and figuring out how to pick up the pieces, which has to happen politically.
Yes.
It has to happen in this election, which means Democrats kind of have to pull up their pants and say, we are behind Joe Biden because this is what we've got. Yeah. And stop running to Politico and Axios and every other outlet for their therapy, wringing their hands about Joe Biden's debate performance, and buckle up.
It's really difficult to understand what people should be doing here. I mean, the Democratic I mean, I don't know what to say. That's the small c constitution of Democrats. Is like, I want to be, look, everybody saw this debate, and it would be ridiculous not to have some reaction to the debate. And I guess in their weird compulsion to be, well, I'm going to be the truth teller, and then everybody's going to listen to me, and I'll have this much credibility with the press, and they'll all have, turn to me for comment, as opposed to, well, we'll just use you to sink your candidate. That's it.
Yeah.
When you call with environmental policy advice, I just, I'm not interested in that quote. Sorry, click. And there's no reward for it, but the compulsion to be, well, I'm the one who won't hide behind partisanship, and I'll tell you, I'll call it like I see it. Okay. I mean, today that gets you in the paper. That's it. That's it. That's the end of the influence for you. But I understand the compulsion. I want to be a truth teller.
But the damage that you are doing is untold.
Yeah.
In fact, that after this, well, last week in the Chevron cases, after the Supreme Court said, yeah, you know what? The experts in the federal government, the career civil service people, no, they don't get to decide these things. We do, even though we don't know the difference between nitrous oxide and
nitrogen oxide.
And the other one.
Yeah, well, maybe nobody knows the difference, but the point is there are people who you can turn to tell you the difference, and maybe they should write the policy. By the way, I don't know if it's such a big deal if nitrous oxide is flowing out into the atmosphere. People might be happy with that, or at least find it funny. But yeah, that was absurd, and I mean, it's hard to describe to people who didn't spend time in law school or in practice at some point after the mid '80s. But I mean, there was no avoiding it. That's like being taught, Brown versus Board of Education, that when you take admin law, Chevron deference, that's the body of law that you know about. And, well, that doesn't go away like Marbury versus Madison doesn't go away. It doesn't happen. Oh, well. It did. Darn.
Oh, well, it did.
Yeah, now what? And, I mean, like, the entire admin law textbook. It's great if you've got a contract to write a new book for teaching admin law, but, very few people actually, are qualified to teach that.
Basically turned generations of lawyers into nothing more than constitutional historians.
Yeah, right. Now I saw lots of people, circulating the picture, somebody jokingly not really, I guess, throwing their admin law textbook in the garbage. I guess this is where it belongs now. But yeah, maybe you want to just have a job as a constitutional historian. Seal that thing up in a cave somewhere, like a Dead Sea Scroll. In an appropriate number of years, someone will rediscover this is the way it used to be. Oh, and we have
a pretty rational response to modern life, wasn't it?
Yeah. What if we overruled the thing that overruled it? Oh, let's try that. So the guidebook will be there now. Like the pandemic response guidebook. Some people will throw it out, and other people will say this is a good idea. So. Don't destroy it. We may need it as a roadmap back. But, yeah, for right now...
Although it's very hard to see how this is undone. Do we have another Supreme Court say, well, yes. I mean, they can overrule precedent all of the time. Sure. So you expand the court and say, take that one back. That one's undone.
You always could do that. It may take years, or, it could be done tomorrow. We have a different Supreme Court. We nominate 9 others, and they sit across the street at a different place. And they say it's good law. Oh, well, that'll be a civil war, but, the other choice is, but you could have a civil war that you surrender in, or I guess you could have one that you fight in. I don't know. There's no real reason to believe that they would go that route, but instead I assume that the Democratic approach to it is, well, we'll have a long slog over years and win back the elected branches such that over time, as we lose current Supreme Court justices to natural attrition, they are replaced by the democratically elected presidents of the future, if there are any of those. I don't know. I mean, it's not a great bet right now, but it's the only system anybody has any experience with. And the only alternative systems are being designed at Heritage Foundations.
Heritage Foundation.
That's not helpful.
No.
So we push forward. I noticed as I'm scrolling down in your latest posts and looking back, I see a different story anyway. House Speaker finally finds a reason to remove a president from office. But is that relevant still, or has that been overruled since Friday when you published it?
Gosh, since Friday I hardly remember what I wrote.
Yeah, right. You probably didn't remember it on Friday because you were distracted by reactions to the debate.
Of course, it's we have to remove Biden.
Yes, well, he's out. Forget it.
Yes.
What are we removing him for? I didn't even get to look at this thing. I just saw the headline. Is it from the debate? Because
after the debate,
okay.
that we've got to pull a 25th Amendment, and the cabinet has to kick him out.
Okay. Well, that's not a frequently entertained option, and of course, Republicans not all that long ago, I think, spent some time arguing that the 25th Amendment was itself invalid because people were threatening to use it against Trump post-insurrection. But, the clock ran out on that one anyway, so they pushed that further. But, another one of those things that is, well, it's unconstitutional to use it against us, but imperative that we use it against you. And that's their usual play.
That's how it works. It's okay if you were a Republican.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since we used that one.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't know how that fell out of usage because it remained true, but I guess the outrages of the Supreme Court made it, I don't know, the problems were more fundamental than just the partisanship. So we focused on the actual underlying problems, but that's always been the case and remains true as far as I can tell. Okay. So.
One thing I would like to see, sort of related.
Yeah, by all means, go anywhere you like.
Every legal pundit who talked about the moderating influence that was John Roberts.
Oh, yeah.
Publicly eat crow. Publicly. Let's have a hearing of all of those people in the Senate Judiciary Committee having to admit how wrong and dumb they were.
Right.
I mean, and, on occasion I was one of them saying, after the Affordable Care Act ruling, well, here's Roberts thinking about his legacy. Here's Roberts thinking, I can't be the one responsible for these great revolutions in American law.
Yeah, and then of course, now just saying to hell with it. Although now it makes you wonder. So are we seeing? Well, was he just saving it all up for this one, or as that's one theory? Oh well, I'll remain moderate until I get the big killer case. Although this was a case that was not easy to see coming. At that point, like you wouldn't have known. Oh yeah. Pretty soon we'll be deciding the question of whether or not just presidents in general, but this ridiculous, idiot, childish, rapist, lunatic president has absolute immunity. And by the way, he wants to nuke hurricanes, and maybe he's going to buy Greenland and various other things, and going to use the military to suppress protest and install himself in the White House, and it's okay to forge the Electoral College certificates. We didn't know all of that was coming when we were deciding the fate of the Affordable Care Act, but I don't know. So that doesn't seem to explain it either. Maybe his mental acuity is now such with his advancing age that he's ineligible for office. Is that possible?
That's possible.
People are talking about. Many people are saying that, by the way. They weren't focusing on John Roberts, but that's because it looked like he might be still functional. But then, of course, you issue a ruling like this, it should make you wonder whether or not he could pass a mental acuity test. Because
yes, it does.
Kids know that no one's above the law. Kids know that presidents can't just commit crimes left and right. But these guys don't. So maybe there's some, it would be hard to explain how it would happen to 6 of them all at once, other than pure partisanship, or water contamination in the building, which would of course be unregulated. And remember, don't you try to tell these Supreme Court justices what can and can't leach into their drinking water. They will decide. So maybe lead is great. I don't know. They have to decide this thing. But certainly something could be wrong with all of their brains, and it's the liberals who bring their own bottled water who aren't having this problem. I don't know. But
it could be. It could be.
Any one of these things could explain it, because nothing else does. So what's...
well, they could all be bought.
Oh, yes, right.
They did. The oligarchs could own all of them. I mean, it's obvious in the case of Thomas and Alito.
Sure. If it could happen
Maybe
to
it's
two
been
of them.
more subtle in the case of Roberts.
That's true. We don't know what his hobbies are and how he finances them. We're still wondering about Justice Kavanaugh financing his hobby, baseball.
Yes.
So, I don't know. That's 3 of the 6.
The consensus I have seen is that his daddy paid for it.
Yeah.
His daddy bailed him out. And I think that's probably likely, because it's just too apropos for who Brett Kavanaugh is.
And I guess when we have traditionally understood that sort of relationship to be kind of sort of okay in America, even though his dad's a lobbyist. And another way of saying this is, a lobbyist paid them all. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, well, but the lobbyist was his dad. Oh, well, in that case, it's fine. Well, it's not so good, even if it was his dad, and his dad was a basket weaver. Not great. But his dad is a lobbyist. And, his dad, where did dad get the money? I don't know. He earned a lot as a lobbyist. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe lots of lobbyists pooled their money and said, let's buy another justice. I don't know. We don't know, because we can't inquire into it. And anyway, they're immune somehow. I don't know. Maybe. We haven't found out about that one yet.
We will soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, wow. I'll ask you this. About the debate. I know what your position is and what we ought to be doing post-debate, but what was the experience of covering it for Daily Kos like? Were you on your own? Were you on a chat with others?
It actually, because various staff vacations and stuff, I was on the video creating side of it rather than the live blogging side of it.
Oh, okay. Well,
Mark Sumner live blogged, and I valiantly tried to find clips that we could put up that would work. It was painful. It was not good.
Yeah,
it was not good.
That's what I'm told.
It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
We got to fix it.
Yeah,
Biden has to fix it. I mean, he last night helped, coming out in the evening to speak to the American people about just exactly what this Supreme Court had just done was a start. But every Democrat now who is talking about the debate instead of talking about the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a good talking to. I don't know what to do about it, but damn it, stop it.
Right, and I mean, this is the most natural jumping off point in the world. Everybody should have something to say about what happened in the court, and it should really be your first concern, because it almost doesn't matter. The election actually matters considerably less if there's just no rule of law to speak of, nothing for Biden to inherit to work with, and no reins on Trump. That's clearly got to take precedence. So I'm kind of, in a sense, glad. And it might have been, I wonder if they even discussed it. Probably not, because all of the deciding had been done by that point when they were handed the debate. But, I mean, if they had the option of delaying things any further, let's let this debate thing play out for a little while longer before we issue our decision. But I guess they painted themselves in a corner with the time at that point. But that must have been, well, I can only imagine what it was like to be covering that in real time and to be responsible for, covering for our Daily Kos audience what they were seeing what you were seeing if they weren't able to watch the debate or were unwilling to watch the debate as I was. But,
it was difficult.
Nothing you can do about that fact and no getting around it. But what we do about it afterwards, that's a subject of great debate. And I really don't. I don't have any recommendation for people who are insisting that they can pull an emergency ripcord because there's no path for it.
No,
but I understand the impulse.
It could be like the Supreme Court and make it up as you go along.
Oh, that's true, and that's exactly what's going to have to happen. Right, they're going to get in the way of it. But yeah, I mean, it just goes against the normal democratic grain to be like, well, I need to be honest about what I saw. Well, okay, but can you also be effective as a leader and pave a realistic path forward as opposed to just panicking? I don't know. If you can't, then maybe just guys have a meeting of some kind. And don't freelance this. To the extent that you think this is extremely important, you're right, but that just means consultation seems to be the path forward, not freelancing with the reporters. You probably agree with that. All right, well, let's assess it again in a week if the court will let us.
Radio.com.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, thanks, Joan. Hang in there.
To Kagro in the morning.
All right. Time for us, of course, to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let him try and deal with this for a few minutes. Why not? And he's got an agenda going forward. But, of course, look, Trump, as you know, has become totally unhinged after the immunity ruling. Let's let Justice enumerate for you just how. Next.